If you're a Christian, you're most likely currently waiting on at least one promise from God. But whether you're waiting on Him to give you a family, a dream career, a house, or all of the above, eventually it gets to the point where the excitement wears off and then the doubt and even discouragement starts creeping in. And that's usually when you start thinking to yourself, what if I just took matters into my own hands and bent God's rules to speed up the process? Well, luckily for you, I already went down that route, and so did a very prominent Bible character. And in today's video, I'll be sharing how both of our stories played out so that by the end of this video, you will have all the information you need to decide whether or not you should follow in our footsteps. Welcome to Live the Scriptures, where we go beyond the surface and dive deep into the Word for guidance on navigating life on the narrow path and to help you get crystal clear on what it actually takes to have the eternal life that Jesus Himself said few are able to find. I think we're currently at like 38 subscribers, so hello to all of my beautiful subscribers. If you feel led to join the squad, I would definitely love to have you. But yeah, now that we got that out of the way, let's jump into my story. So I had my first supernatural encounter with God in 2013 during college. I was extremely toxic before I got saved, so needless to say, I was in an extremely toxic on and off 4-year relationship. I wouldn't even call myself lukewarm at that point though. I was more of an atheist because even though my mom brought us to church every Sunday growing up, I just really wasn't buying the whole God thing. Unfortunately, I come from generational trauma, so I grew up witnessing the same domestic violence on a regular basis that my parents also did. So as a child trapped in this miserable life, it just didn't make sense that a God would exist and allow this. Even at church, I realized pretty quickly that there was a huge disconnect in the way that we were taught Christians should act versus the way everyone actually lived their lives. So by the age of like 13, I ended up coming to the conclusion that God was just a figment of everyone's imaginations. And then when you fast forward to college, now I'm getting my bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in chemistry. And so the concept of God existing seems even more unrealistic to me now. But for some reason, during one of the many breakups me and this person had, I remember feeling so emotionally drained. And for some reason, I just felt like I should go to church. So I went, and at the end of the service, I felt like I should go to the altar to pray with everyone else. But I was still kind of keeping my distance so that I could like cry alone without anyone noticing and making a scene with the tissues and the fans. Because if you go to a Black church, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So at this point, I'm throwing a full-on pity party in victim mode in my head, just over and over and over again, asking a God that I don't even believe in. Why is this happening to me? Why is this something I deserve? And I just kept repeating that inside of my head over and over and over again. But on the outside, it just looked like I was a peaceful, praying woman, which is pretty funny to me. Imagine the shock I felt when out of nowhere, this thought just randomly storms into my brain like thunder, completely interrupting my current stream of consciousness. To this day, I still remember the exact words. He said, "You don't deserve this. You're my child." Now remember, I'm Little Miss Logical with the bachelor's degree in science who was never wrong ever about anything. And with all the things that they taught us about evolution theories, global warming, and even the age of the earth, it all completely supported my unbelief. But it was impossible for me to lie to myself and deny the fact that the thought that I just heard was absolutely in no way my own. Like, it's literally impossible that that could have been my voice, because at the time I was so self-loathing that I honestly did feel like I deserved to be in that miserable relationship. I was more so just desperate for something or someone to explain to me why. But God knew that is exactly what I needed for Him to get my attention. And when He said that to me, I completely lost it. I was just overwhelmed with feeling what true love was for the first time in my life as a junior in college. And after that, I decided that I wanted to do things differently. I decided that I would stay abstinent until marriage, but this was way before we had access to all the information we have now. So of course, within a few months, I do end up getting back with that guy. But not too long after that, I ended up ending things with him for good and decided to give my relationship with God a real try. The only thing is that I was not prepared at all for the warfare that I was going to be up against. I was trying to survive the narrow path by just going to church once a week because I honestly didn't know any better. I had no idea that reading the Bible wasn't wasn't optional, so I definitely made some mistakes that gave the enemy a lot of legal access to me. Not only that, but I was also living with my mom, and thankfully now we're in a much better space. But at that time, we just did not get along. Our relationship was pretty toxic up until around like 5 years ago. Now that I'm mature in my Christianity, I completely understand that God was taking me through my refining process back then, but I just couldn't understand why I started losing everything as soon as I gave God my yes. I felt like God basically turned his back on me and let me down once again. I remember just feeling like God basically turned his back on me and let me down once again, and that's exactly how I remember feeling when I was growing up. But one day, me and my mom get into a huge fight, and around that time, another guy enters the picture. So by now, I've been abstinent and broken up with the first boyfriend for like a year, and I end up moving out of my mom's house, but I didn't have a car to get to and from work. And so I ended up telling that guy, and he told me that he would let me take his car whenever I had to work, which was huge for me as someone who wasn't raised with love. So of course I end up trauma bonding to him and decide to throw the whole abstinence journey and God out the window. So yeah, we're now on boyfriend number 2, but remember, I have not completed my refining process yet, so I'm still very much unhealed and toxic, which means that his glaring red flags don't seem like that big of a deal because I also have my own glaring red flags. But together we end up accomplishing a lot of the things that I felt like God was taking too long to do. Within a year, we moved to Houston, and 2 years after that, we got married. We had high-rise apartments with valets and concierge, luxury vacations. I went on solo trips out the country. I ate the best food. I didn't have to work, and we also didn't have kids, so I basically had access to whatever I wanted within reason. Everything was good until it wasn't. And that's because from day one, this man was a counterfeit that was sent to keep me distracted and derail me from God's plan for my life. He said that he was a Christian, but he came from a long line of people who practiced something else, and I was too lukewarm to realize it. It's crazy, but God even sent someone to warn me whenever we first started dating, but I didn't believe them. And let me just say this, you don't have to be a Bible scholar in order to avoid life-altering consequences, because if only I had just obeyed one of God's most obvious commands, it would have saved me from wasting almost a decade of my time. Because had I just been serious about my abstinence until marriage journey, this situation would have never made it this far. A year before the end of that relationship, I ended up finding my way back to God, and he made it clear to me that I had to cut all ties with this life that I worked so hard to build over the last 7 years because it was not a part of his plan for me. I tried so hard to salvage what I could, but God made it abundantly clear that I had to leave that old life and everything tied to it behind. It's been 3 years since we separated and 2 since the divorce, and since God told me to leave everything behind, that literally left me right back at square one in the exact same position I was in right before I met him. One of the biggest lessons I learned from this is the importance of reading your Bible, because even if I only read Genesis, I would have known enough to not take matters into my own hands. Abraham and Sarah did the same thing, and it also turned out to be a hot mess that went on to have lasting consequences. I think they said the people who descended from Ishmael are the people who are unaliving Christians in the Middle East. And Ishmael, of course, is the baby that Abraham created with Hagar because he wasn't able to get Sarah pregnant. The moral of the story is that the things that you want the most are most likely desires given to you by God himself, but a blessing that is given to you too soon isn't a blessing at all. It's a curse, and I guarantee you that it's not coming from God, it's coming from the enemy. It's very rare that God will hand us anything overnight because he wants to give us the time to develop the habits, discipline, and knowledge needed in order to be good stewards over that baby, that new home, or that spouse. He specifically talks about allowing the Israelites to conquer the promised land little by little so that they won't get overwhelmed. Not only that, but he also uses this time to develop our character so that we have the faith, wisdom, and the spiritual maturity in order to steward those blessings in a way that will bring glory to his name. None of these things happen overnight, so be very skeptical anytime you're presented with a blessing that God didn't put you through training camp for. You would never give a 12-year-old a Lamborghini, but a person who hates their dad might be hoping that he can hurt the father indirectly by harming the child. So needless to say, I definitely learned my lesson from that, and I will never take matters into my own hands again. And I'm pretty sure if Abraham and Sarah were sitting next to me, they would say the same thing. So if you're still thinking about making something happen to speed up God's plan for your life, I rebuke you right now. Seriously, guys, the shortcut is never worth it, and it never ends up working out in the long run because it was built on sand. So do yourself a favor and wait for God's best.